we realize the specific value of what we gain, without difficulty and through good fortune, only in terms of the significance of that which is hard to achieve and involves sacrifices. The latter has the same value, but with a negative sign, and it is the primary source from which the former value is derived. Of course, these may be exaggerated or exceptional cases. In order to discover their general type in the economic sphere, it is necessary first of all to distinguish the economic aspect, as a special characteristic or form, from the fact of value as a universal quality of substance. If we accept value as being given, it follows from what has been said previously that economic value is not an inherent quality of an object, but is established by the expenditure of another object which is given in exchange for it. Wild grain, which can be harvested without effort and immediately consumed without any exchange, is an economic good only if its consumption saves some other expenditure. But if all the necessities of life could be obtained in this way without any sacrifice, there would be no economic system anymore. Then in the case of birds or fish or the inhabitants of the land of milk and honey, no matter how the two objects A and B have become values, A becomes an economic value only because I have to exchange it for B, and B only because I can acquire A in exchange for it. It makes no difference whether the sacrifice is accomplished by transferring a value to another person through inter-individual exchange, or by balancing the efforts and gains within the individual's own sphere of interest. Economic objects have no significance except directly or indirectly in our consumption and in the exchange that occurs between them. The former alone is not sufficient to make the object an economic one, only the latter can give it the specific characteristic that we call economic. Yet this distinction between value and its economic form is artificial. In the first place, although the economy may seem to be a mere form in the sense that it presupposes value as its content in order to make the balancing of sacrifice and gain possible, in reality this process through which an economic system is constructed from the presupposed values may be interpreted as the originator of economic values. The economic form of value lies between two limits. On the one side is the desire for the object, arising from the anticipated satisfaction of possession and enjoyment. On the other side is the enjoyment itself, which is not strictly speaking an economic act. If the previous argument is accepted, namely that the direct consumption of wild grain is not an economic act, except to the extent that it economizes on the production of economic values, then the consumption of real economic values is itself no longer an economic act, for these two acts of consumption are totally indistinguishable. Whether somebody has found, stolen, cultivated or bought the grain does not make the slightest difference for the act of consumption and its direct consequences. The object, as we have seen, is not yet of value so long as it is only the direct stimulant and a natural part of our sentiments inseparable from the subjective process. The object has to be detached from this in order to gain the specific significance that we call value. Desire by itself cannot bring about value unless it encounters obstacles. If every desire could be satisfied completely without a struggle, the economic exchange of values would never have developed, and the desire itself would never have reached a high level. Only the deferment of satisfaction through obstacles, the fear of never attaining the object, the tension of struggling for it, brings together the various elements of desire, the intense striving and continuous acquisition. But even if the strongest element of desire came only from within the individual, the object that satisfies it would still have no value if it were abundantly available. The whole genus of things that guarantee the satisfaction of our wishes would be important to us, but not the limited portion that we acquire, because this could be replaced without effort by any other portion. Our awareness of the value of the whole genus would arise from the idea of its being absent altogether. In this case, our consciousness would be simply determined by the rhythm of the subjective wishes and satisfactions without paying any attention to the mediating object. Need and enjoyment alone do not comprehend either value or economic life, which are realized simultaneously through the exchange between two subjects, each of whom requires a sacrifice by the other, or its equivalent in the self-sufficient economy, in order to be satisfied. Exchange, i.e. the economy, is the source of economic values, because exchange is the representative of the distance between subject and object which transforms subjective feelings into objective valuation. I mentioned earlier Kant's summary of his epistemology. The conditions of experience are at the same time the conditions of the objects of experience, by which he meant that the process that we call experience and the representations that form its contents and objects are subject to the same laws of the understanding. Objects can be experienced because they are representations within us, and the same power that determines experience determines also the formation of representations. In the same manner we can state, the possibility of the economy is at the same time the possibility of the objects of the economy. The process between two owners of objects, of substances, labor power or rights of any kind, that establishes the relationship called economy, i.e. a reciprocal surrender, raises these objects at the same time into the category of value. The logical difficulty, that values had to exist as values in order to enter the form and movement of the economy, is now eliminated by the significance of the psychic relation which we designated as the distance between us and the object. This psychic relationship differentiates the original subjective condition of feeling into the desiring subject and the opposed object which possesses value. In the economy, this distance is brought about through exchange, through the two-sided influence of barriers, obstacles and renunciation. Economic values are produced by the same reciprocity and relativity that determine the economic character of values. Exchange is not the mere addition of two processes of giving and receiving, but a new third phenomenon, in which each of the two processes is simultaneously cause and effect. The value that the object gains through renunciation thereby becomes an economic value. In general, value develops in the interval that obstacles, renunciation and sacrifice interpose between the will and its satisfaction. The process of exchange consists in the mutual determination of taking and giving, and it does not depend upon a particular object having previously acquired a value for a particular subject. All that is needed is accomplished in the act of exchange itself. Of course, in an actual economic system the value of objects is usually indicated when they enter into exchange. I am referring here only to the inner, systematic meaning of the concept of value and exchange, which exists only in rudimentary form, or as an ideal significance in the historical phenomena or as their ideal meaning. I refer not to their real form, in the historical genetic sense, but to their objective logical form. Theories of utility and scarcity. This transposition of the concept of economic value from the abstract sphere to that of vital relationships may be further elucidated with the aid of the concepts of utility and scarcity, which are generally regarded as constituent elements of value. The first requirement for an economic object to exist, based upon the disposition of the economic subject, is utility. To this, scarcity must be added as a second determining factor if the object is to acquire a specific value. If economic values are regarded as being determined by supply and demand, supply would correspond with scarcity and demand with utility. Utility would decide whether the object is in demand at all and scarcity the price that we are obliged to pay. Utility appears as the absolute part of economic values, and its degree has to be known so that the objects can enter into economic exchange. Scarcity is only a relative factor, since it signifies only the quantitative relationship of the object in question to the total available amount. The qualitative nature of the object does not play any role here. Utility, however, seems to exist prior to any economic system, to any comparison or relationship with other objects. It is the substantial factor determining the movement of the economy. However, this situation is not correctly described by the concept of utility. What is really meant is the desire for the object. Utility as such is never able to bring about economic processes unless it leads to demand, and it does not always do so.